Angriness in Russia. Why? In Russia, the Tsar had absolute power. Everyone had to obey him. The people had a hard time. In the 19th century, there was almost no industry in Russia. The vast majority of the population was peasant and serfs under their lord, as in the Middle Ages, a kind of slaves. Under Tsar Alexander II, serfdom was abolished in 1861, but he was assassinated in 1881 by revolutionaries who wanted more changes. There were no improvements under the Tsars after him. Meanwhile, more organizations were formed in Russia against the Tsar. In 1904, the Russo-Japanese War broke out. Russia thought it was easy to win, but they had heavy losses and were defeated. On Sunday, January 9, 1905, thousands of workers, led by the priest Gapon, marched peacefully to the Winter Palace of the Tsar in St. Petersburg. They wanted to present him a petition for more rights and improvement of working conditions. But the soldiers who guarded the palace felt threatened and started shooting at the unarmed crowd, causing hundreds of casualties. This event is known as Bloody Sunday. As a result, more strikes broke out. Meanwhile, Soviets were established in St. Petersburg and other cities. Soviets? Yes, Soviets. A Soviet is a council or meeting of workers, peasants and soldiers, and here the ordinary people had a voice. The Soviets organized strikes. Nicholas II was shocked by all these developments and introduced a Duma, a national assembly. Now, the common people could vote. But the Duma had little power. It was allowed to give advice, but could not make any important decisions. In Russia, there were various political groups, including socialists. They were inspired by Karl Marx. He wrote that the poor wage earners, or the proletariat, would live under such bad conditions they would start a revolution, seize the power, and distribute everything fairly among the people. Marx's idea was that this revolution would break out in an industrialized country, so not in Russia, where there was little industry. There were two groups of socialists in Russia, the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. The Mensheviks were moderate. They wanted universal suffrage and were willing to cooperate with the liberals. The Bolsheviks were more radical and wanted to lead the revolution. Despite the introduction of the Duma, the people still were dissatisfied. Nicholas II struck down revolts, sent the Duma away if they contradicted him, and he was influenced by Rasputin, a strange monk who had healed the son of the Tsar and gained a lot of influence. The First World War was disastrous for Russia. German troops won more and more territory. The economy was also disrupted, and fields were not farmed because farmers had to serve in the army. In February 1917, strikes and riots broke out again, the beginning of the February Revolution. People demanded that the Tsar had to abdicate. Again, a Soviet was formed in the capital of St. Petersburg, which received much support from the people. It was demanded that the war must end. The Tsar used the army to keep things quiet, but the officers refused to do so. Nicholas II, who was at the front, went back to St. Petersburg by train, but the train was stopped by the army. For Nicholas, it was clear now. He abdicated in March. All these changes are called the February Revolution. The Duma now chose a provisional government of Mensheviks and liberals. There was universal suffrage. Fair land division was promised, but the war just continued. The peasant soldiers refused to fight on and went home to take their promised lands. The Soviet in the capital of St. Petersburg or Petrograd promised peace and got a lot of power under the leadership of Lenin, who came back to Russia in April because he was banned. He did not want anything to do with the provisional government. He wanted a revolution. On October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized the power. The members of the provisional government were arrested. This is known as the October Revolution. The First World War was ended. They made peace with Germany, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Tsar, who was no longer Tsar, and his family were murdered in 1918. The Communist Party got all power. Soil and factories were now in the hands of the state. Many nobles and rich citizens fled to the west. The illiterate learned to read and write. Differences between men and women were lifted. But there was no peace in Russia itself. Many people did not agree with Lenin and the Bolsheviks. A 4-year civil war broke out between the Red Army of the Bolsheviks and their opponents, the White Army. The White Army was supported by foreign countries, but they lost the war. In 1922, the USSR was founded, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, better known as the Soviet Union. Yet, it did not go very well economically. The radical approach to confiscate all farms and demanding a lot of grain from the farmers for the townspeople led to insurrections. There was also hunger because farmers just hid their grain. Therefore, new measures were taken, known as the New Economic Policy. This meant that farmers were allowed to keep and sell part of their harvest, instead of giving everything to the state. Factories also could work independently. These measurements improved the economic situation. The NEP remained from 1921 to 1927. Lenin died in 1924. His successor was Stalin.